Hey, it's Shawn with Kiwi. Welcome back to our series on straps and chains. Today we're going to dive a little deeper into chains. So in our strapping video, we talked about the places where straps are optimal for quickness, for lightweight, for tying down lumber, things like that. When it comes to tying down machinery and things that are made out of steel, then chains are going to be kind of your first thought. So one of the differences between straps and chains is the difference in working load limit. And most straps are going to be 5,400 pounds for a 4-inch strap, and they're going to be 4,000 pounds if they're not marked. Chains come in different sizes. So in order to know the working load limit on a chain, first of all, you need to know what size chain you're working with, and then you need to know what grade chain you're working with. So our standard company equipment is 3/8 grade 70. But drivers need to be able to inspect to make sure that they don't have any substandard equipment that might have gotten into the mix somewhere. So starting out with the hook, if you look at the hook, it should say grade 70 on it somewhere. And it should also tell you what size chain it's intended to work with. So this is a 3/8 hook. So grade 70, 3/8. And then it needs to have a proper pin. So you can see that this pin says grade 70 right on the end of it. So that's a proper pin, and it's held in with a cotter pin, not a piece of wire or a R-clip or anything else. So that takes care of the hook itself, but that doesn't tell you anything about the chain. The chain itself needs to have some kind of marking on it with a 7 in it to identify it as grade 70. If you see a 4, then it's a grade 43 high test chain. It's not grade 70. Or if you see a piece of chain that's not marked at all, then you have to consider it as type 30 chain, because type 30 chain doesn't have a marking on it. And if a grade 70 chain gets degraded to the point where the markings are no longer visible, then in the eyes of a law enforcement officer, it's going to be a grade 30 chain. It says so right in the FMCSR. So to convert that grade and size into a working load limit, then you need some help from the charts that are in the FMCSR. So what the officers on the road will carry is a little chain gauge like this that shows the sizes of chain down one side of the gauge, and then if they have a damaged chain, then this is the no-go side of the gauge over here, and it's reduced by 20%. So if they're inspecting your chain, they're going to hold that gauge on there and figure out what size chain that you have, and then if you have a damaged link in your chain, which this link would be immediately out of service because it's been deformed. If a steel fastener is not its original shape, then it's immediately out of service. But if it was just a reduction in diameter, then they would take the no-go side of that gauge, and if they could slip that on there in the 3/8 position, then that chain would be out of service anyway. So be sure that you inspect your chains, especially right after you get done using them. That damage is going to be fresh and shiny, and it's going to be easier to spot than it would be if you put the chain away and tried to inspect it a few days later. So once you know what size and grade of chain that you're working with, then you go to your FMCSR and go to the charts for chains. You've got the sizes listed across the side and the grades listed across the top. So if we look up grade 3/8 grade 70 in here, we're going to see it's a 6,600 pound working load limit. Our straps were 5,400 pounds, so already we're quite a bit substantially larger in working load limit. But the other thing that's built into chains is instead of a 3-to-1 breaking strength to working load limit ratio, they've got a 4-to-1 working load limit to breaking strength ratio, but that's only true of grade 70, not the other grades. The other grades are 3-to-1. So a 6,600 pound chain, in theory, should not break until you're north of 26,000 pounds with it. It's going to deform before you get to that point. So there again, that's why a deformed piece of chain has to be considered as out of service, because it's been overstressed. In order for that chain to have that full working load limit though, every part of that securement system has to have at least that much working load limit, if not more. So if that chain has got a 6,600 pound working load limit and the hook does, then the next component is we're going to use a binder to tighten it up. Now when you look at your binders, you have to make sure that they're rated for the correct size of chain and that they have the correct working load limit on them. outwardly, these two binders look exactly the same, but if we take a look at the handle on this one, you'll see that the working load limit is 5,400 pounds. So if we put this onto our 3/8 grade 70 chain, it's going to degrade the working load limit down to 5,400 pounds. This one, again, they look almost identical. This one has the working load limit of 6,600 pounds written right there on the handle, and then you want to verify your chain sizes, usually on the hook, or sometimes those chain sizes will be listed on the handle as well. So one of the places that chains really shine is when you're tying down things that are made out of steel, like equipment. So if you watched our video on straps, you saw that we had a strap in this same position and that strap was being damaged by the machine. In this situation, it isn't like it's impossible for the chain to be damaged by the machine, but it's much less likely because they're both made out of steel. Straps are basically fabric. They're threads that are woven into the form of a strap. So you're going to have a lot more resistance to damage from your equipment. However, you do need to be careful about damaging your freight. And of course, that's kind of up to the shipper and receiver to determine how fussy they are about that. But as drivers, we always want to try to deliver things with as minimal damage as possible. So one of the big advantages of chains too is that they give you an easier way to use indirect fasteners, where you would go like over the top of or through the middle of a piece of cargo and down to the other side of the trailer. Or I've set up a temporary direct fastener right here where we're using a shackle that's got adequate working load limit, and we're just going directly from the cargo to one side of the trailer. So it's not that it's impossible to do that with straps, but it's much less likely and it's much more difficult to do it with straps, so it's going to be more common to use chains in a situation where you need a direct fastener. That gives you a lot more control. Your indirect fastener basically acts as a clamp holding something down to the trailer, so it doesn't have as much resistance to that piece moving, where if you've got a direct fastener, then you've got a lot more control of it moving, so it's a lot more easy to accomplish with a chain. Another huge example of where chains really shine over straps is when you're having to run fasteners at angles like this. Instead of coming straight up, you're going at an angle. A chain is much more versatile for being able to adjust to those angles without causing any damage to the fastener. Be sure to tune in. We're going to get into that in more detail in one of our future videos. So chains do have their disadvantages. They're a little bit heavier. They're a little bit more time consuming and difficult to use. They add a little bit more to your empty weight of your truck. But all in all, especially when you're hauling machinery and things that are made out of steel, they give you a lot more versatility and a lot more durability. They also give you attachment ideas that you maybe wouldn't be able to do any other way, like this T-hook for hooking into John Deere equipment, for example, or different styles of hooks that you could use for different applications, or shackles or things of that nature. So they do have their disadvantages, but I think the advantages for a lot of situations far outweigh that. So keep those things in mind, the choices, and happy chaining.